It's just so orange. It's like I'm like an Oompa Loompa in the first iteration of Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory. I'll start doing the squats, right?
You're right though. It's getting more orange over time.
Every single ex that I had actually wanted to take my surname because they think my surname is like really cool, and they were actually really excited for that. But I was like, we're not getting married even. I'm not getting to you.
You don't get to have this. This is a limited edition.
Whenever you were both saying those things, I was like, man, they may want it, but you don't want them, so see ya. Sorry.
Hello and welcome to Milliseconds Apart, a podcast where three friends chat about pretty much anything we feel like on the given day. My name's Izzy. I'm a final year medical student at Cambridge.
I'm Rudy. I'm also a medical student and also a YouTuber.
And I'm Matt, and I used to have a crush on the green M&M. I actually dressed as the green M&M one year for Halloween. My mom was like, you know, it's a girl. I was like, no, it's a boy. She's like, there's eyelashes. I was like, yeah, boys have eyelashes too.
It's a good point. Boys do have eyelashes too.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah.
Also, isn't there something like boys tend to have longer eyelashes than girls?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I never know how to go on from these.
Yeah, we lean in. We just lean in.
Okay, let's go for it. So today something I've been thinking about is the role of marriage and getting married. So I feel like in the past, everyone used to see getting married as the kind of standard step that everyone takes. It sort of was a standard thing that everyone did. And divorce used to be quite unusual. But over time, the structure of marriage in our society has sort of become a bit more fluid. More people are kind of getting married and then maybe separating later, or just choosing to never even get married in the first place. So I was trying to think about whether marriage is something that still plays a role in my life and what I want for my own life. And I think that it does. And I'm trying to unpick why, because often there'll be people online saying, no, I don't ever want to get married. Like, why would you do that? And on the other hand, there's also people who say, oh, marriage is so important for building a stable family unit and also for building a life with someone. It's just a really useful thing to do. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. So I guess, do you guys want to get married? Not to each other, obviously, but at some point in the future, do you want to get married?
Yeah, for me, I'm actually one. Yeah, I absolutely do. So I think that's always been one of those, call it a social convention, call it parts of life, call it a stage, where I've said to myself, yep, that is something that I truly want. And there's a lot of peace that I feel with that. Like the idea of building my life with somebody and the idea of having, say, a commitment to this person. Maybe I go to like my Catholic faith and that being one of the sacraments and like that whole experience of, yes, like it's two becoming one, right? It's two souls becoming one. Like that to me is always been very appealing, and one of the things in addition to fatherhood that I've always really wanted in life. Who's to say that it'll happen or not, but I definitely know that when I'm honest with myself, that is a part of life that I really, really want. What about you, Ruri?
I don't want to get married, but it doesn't mean that I don't want to have a partner or I don't want to become a mom. I think I can definitely become a mom without getting married with someone else. So the idea of being partners throughout your life was really new to me. I learned about it when I did my exchange year in Germany. So I think I was like 17 or so, and I was pretty shocked that there were people who were having kids without getting married, and they were like living together. They have different surnames and stuff. But the only difference they had from the normal families is that the fact that they're not married. But other than that, everything that they do was pretty similar. And from that point, I started to think, why do we get even married? For maybe laws or more like social security and all that stuff. And that person is really close to me. He is my host family's really close friend. We are also pretty close friends. And he was telling me, why are you trying to get married? What is the reason? If you cannot trust that person without a piece of paper, without signing it, if you're afraid of the laws, then why aren't you even getting married in the first place if you cannot really trust that person? So I started to think about that from that point, and you know what? I'm not going to get married probably. I'll have a partner, but I don't think that I'll do a classical marriage, I think. What do you guys think about that? Why do you guys want to get married? Matt, you said that you want to become a father, so you want to get married, but you can become a father without getting married.
Yeah, so I don't see it because of that. Well, I guess partly I do. I've had discussions with friends in the past where, yeah, they're not. It doesn't have to be one then the other, right? That's not necessary. But for me, like that is the path that I personally want to take. Like I want it to be, and a lot of that's probably because of the background and the household that I grew up in, where it was my parents, and then so they got married, and then they had kids, and like that was the house that we had, and it was the most amazing experience. Obviously, I don't have anything to directly compare it to, but that foundation of marriage for them, which made it so that they focused in on themselves and on growing together and then building out that family unit, that is something that I want to personally emulate. It's interesting you asked that why. So in my life, right, like with, as I said before, Catholic upbringing, it's always been this idea of, okay, this is just what you do. And like, so marriage to me has always come from this religious background, this area of faith. Well, two of my best friends, so they asked me to officiate their wedding last year. So they asked me 2 years ago. And so part of that process was understanding, okay, what exactly do they want? Because neither of them are religious. So it wasn't from that aspect. And so we would have sessions where I would just genuinely ask them, like, so what is the point of getting married for both of you, right? Where it's not in front of God, it's not in front of, it's like from the law, like you can just go to the courtroom, like what's the point of getting married itself? And their thought was interesting, where it was, hey, this is a public commitment that we're making to one another. That was the point of the marriage for them. It wasn't steeped in anything like maybe deeper than that. It was just, hey, this is us publicly showing to one another and to all of our friends and family, this is why, or like that we are becoming one, right? Or something like that. I'm not doing them justice in their way of thinking, but that's the only other way that I have had conversations with friends to understand, all right, if you're not doing it from a religious background, why are you doing
It's interesting that you bring up the religious aspect, because for me, I'm not religious. I would say I'm agnostic or /atheist. I was raised in an atheist household. And for me, marriage still seems like something that feels like it would be important to me. And hearing both of your perspectives on this, I've kind of realized maybe why that is a bit more in myself. And I guess to me, this idea of the partnership with somebody and building that, and like you were saying, Matt, sort of two becoming one, and being able to really invest in that relationship wholeheartedly without any kind of thought or shadow a doubt of thinking, oh, maybe there's somebody else out there who might be better for me. There's like all of that noise just gets cut out. I feel like when you choose to commit yourself to one partner and invest in the relationship, and no relationship will be easy. There will always be ups and downs. There'll be times when you're really connected. There'll be times when you feel really disconnected. But I think that you need something to hold on to in those times when you feel disconnected, to bring you back and to fortify that relationship and rebuild it. When I see these old couples who've lived together their whole lives, it's quite rare for them to say that everything was all smooth sailing. Life just isn't usually smooth sailing. But I feel like something about that commitment to each other means that, like, when you see them together as these old people who've grown old together, they've lived their whole lives together, they know so much about each other and they've gone through so much together because they've made that commitment. And you don't need a piece of paper to make that kind of commitment, but it is a way of making that commitment. It is a form of making that deeper commitment to somebody. So I can see how maybe somebody can be completely committed and dedicated to somebody without having to get married. But for me, I feel like the process of getting married to someone, even though it's not for God or for any religious reason, just going through that ritual and making those vows feels meaningful in some way that is hard to replace.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And going to what you were saying before, Ruri, relating that to Izzy's comment there, like there's something about, like, do you need it? Maybe not, right? Maybe it's this idea, like I hear that argument where, oh, if you're so committed, why do you need, right, a piece of paper? Why do you need that sort of process, right, to go through it? But there still is this, like, maybe it's a social expectation, and maybe it's just an understanding that we all have growing up. up really in a society that still values marriage, where like it helps us to just be a little bit more or a lot more committed, where from that perspective it's kind of this idea of, hey, like there's no way out. Granted, like that's even a different thing now, because like there's divorce, right? So like there technically is, but it's the different mentalities that people even take towards it, where, you know, in sometimes making the commitment, well, in the commitment you're saying like, okay, I am 100% into this, right? And we're not like through thick and thin, right? Till death do us part, all the stereotypical vows, like we're actually committing to that in a way that's very different than, hey, like yes, I'm committed to you, but there's something that's more lasting. I'm not really able to put my finger on it.
You guys have been talking about commitment when it comes to marriage. So what do you guys think about polyamorous relationships? Because, I mean, I'm talking about like a partnership. So you can be a partner with someone else and you can still see someone else if you both agree on that. What do you guys think about that? Like we've been discussing about this with my mom, and she really recommends me that. She says that, like, for your personality, you get bored easily from people, and it's always the side that breaks up is always me, because of me and my boredom. At some point, suddenly, I lost all of my interest towards that person. It like doesn't have necessarily, we don't have to experience something bad or, I don't know, like dramatic to this to happen. It's like suddenly I lose all of my interest towards that person. So I think I have problems with commitment. I don't cheat, but at some point I just lose all of it. So what do you guys think about polyamorous relationships? I've been thinking about that quite a lot.
Yeah, I'll give my 2 cents, where I don't know if I know enough to be able to speak intelligently about it, where I think before, you know, call it a year, 2 years, like I would have definitely said, nope, not a thing, right? Like that's how can that happen, right? I had all these just presumptions about it, until I did have like one of my friends, like a pretty good friend, who she opened up about like, hey, like this is what polyamorous relationships are like, and like actually had hours and hours where we had these conversations, and it was just like I was able to ask any question about it, and to get this perspective, to understand, you know, this part of the culture that so often is not publicized, right? It's this type of thing where she's the only person that I had ever known, right, who was and who like continues to be in polyamorous relationships. But she also, one of the things she said to me is, you'd be surprised how many people do it, right? You'd be surprised where, like, because it's just not open, it's just not out there. So I'm like open to the idea, and like I'm always curious whenever, right, people will talk about it, and like I'll genuinely ask, right? There's no more judgment in my eyes of, oh, okay, like what is that? It's just like, okay, how does that work? How does that differ, right? Because there's plenty of people that are in like blanking, that are in relationships with only one other person, who are miserable, right, or who it's not healthy for. So yeah, I'm curious is kind of the main thing. I don't think that it'll ever be something for me. It's just one of those that I have no judgment towards others. Like I just know that I want to be committed to one person. That's like more maybe my personality, like who I really am. But I'm always like, you know, when friends go through it, let me ask the questions.
I think as well, at the end of the day, relationships are all about what the people in the relationship want and whether it's working for them. So I have a few friends who are polyamorous or in open relationships, and they're very happy with it, and it seems to work very well for them. For me personally, I think I see the amount of emotional effort and also just time, like physically, like time spent in those relationships for those friends. It takes a lot to really balance out any feelings of jealousy. You need to have really strong communication, like every relationship should, but you need to put even more into that in order to make it a healthy polyamorous relationship. At least that's from what I've seen in my very limited experience. I feel like I also don't necessarily have enough experience in this area to really speak with any certainty, but it seems like a lot of energy, and I'd be actually just happy to invest that energy in building a relationship with one person, because it's hard enough to have one good relationship with like one person, let alone balancing with multiple people. But I do think it is a nice way to be able to express love to multiple people if that's just how you feel you work. So yeah, what's the draw for you for polyamory? What were you talking about with your mum about it?
I think like I talked with one of my friends who has an open relationship, and she was telling me that for every single relationship, what she's looking for is different. So with one of them, she looks only for like emotional connection. It's actually a person that she really clicks, but she's not necessarily physically attracted to him. So she has another relationship for that. And with that person, she doesn't have any emotional connection. It's like more physical stuff. And the other one is like more emotional. And the one of them is more long-distance relationship, that emotional one. Therefore, she also has another one for casual dates and hangouts and stuff. So she basically divided all of these relationships for different categories and different functionalities.
Yeah.
And I was really interested in that. I never experienced an open relationship, so I don't really know what I think about it. I don't think that I'll get jealous, but I'm also not sure. But why is commitment even important?
Actually, speaking of open relationships in the context of marriage, some people do open marriages. So I guess even within marriage doesn't mean that it's a monogamous relationship. It could be an open relationship, which is still there is still that level of commitment there. But I mean, you can get married even in polyamorous relationships as well. So this whole area of relationships and marriage is just so complex. I feel like I'm only just starting to scratch the surface of like understanding the way that people really do this. So it's really interesting to hear both of your takes on it. One thing I'm quite interested in hearing more about actually is, Matt, you mentioned that you feel intuitively like open relationships or polyamory is not for you. Like, where does that come from? Like, why do you feel like being with one person would be more satisfying for you personally?
Yeah, I think that, so it was really interesting. I like that take that Ruri you had there from your friend, where she's talking about getting things from different relationships, right? Getting, different, whether it's emotion, it's the physical thing, it's the hangout, all that. And I feel like I do that, but I do that with friends, right? So like for me, different friends fulfill different parts of my life, and that's where I don't feel as though I would need or even really want to have, like, Izzy, what you talked about with having multiple relationships and the energy to put in. That to me, it's like, maybe it's because of the way that I think about like romantic relationships. What I would commit time wise would be so much more compared to what I commit to friends, where it's like, yeah, I still spend a lot of time with friends, but it's a different sort of relationship where it's, okay, it's touch and go. It's not an everyday sort of thing. It's not like building that sort of life with each of them. And I think that in that, I don't know really, like, so I'm thinking out loud here, right, going through the process with both of your questions, right, with both of the questions you were coming up of like, why does marriage really even matter? They're like, well, what is that thing with commitment? And then why do I feel as though I'm intuitively like would just want a monogamous relationship? And the simplest answer to it is like, well, one, it just feels right in my heart and in my gut. And like, I spent a lot of time over the last few years really getting to know myself. And sometimes it's those things of, I'll ask the question to myself, why? And it's like, oh, am I just doing it to give into a social convention? Am I just doing it for whatever reason? But sometimes I think to myself, like, well, this is a good enough reason that it feels right for me. This is a life that I would want to lead. That idea of like, oh, well, I don't really have to explain to anybody else there. And it's that idea, well, it does help too, that it's like the path I want to take is the more socially acceptable one. So like, there's nobody asking me, right? There's nobody coming out saying like, why do you just want one relationship? Right? Like there's nobody asking me, there's nobody coming with a state of judgment, right? Like with a state of like judging me in that, right? Yours is from a curiosity standpoint. And I guess my thought process is like, yeah, like that's a good enough way for me. Like that's not a social convention that like I even want to challenge. Like there's a lot of peace that I feel approaching life in this way. And it's kind of like put my mental energy of the why of questioning to other topics. Yeah. Maybe that was an evasive answer, but I appreciate both of the questions because this is getting me to think about this.
I think it's a good answer in a way, because there are lots of structures in society that have developed over hundreds or thousands of years, maybe even more, like hundreds of thousands of years. Some ways that we just interact and the ways that we socialize and form relationships. And I think that in some ways there is some wisdom in the structures that have developed. That doesn't mean that we can't question them or we can't do things differently or that doing things differently won't work. but it is a kind of a model that does bring a lot of peace and satisfaction to many people, and we can see that in the track record of all these couples around us who have these monogamous relationships which are happy and successful. So I guess for you, Matt, if you don't feel any urge or desire to go beyond that, then there's no reason to force yourself to, and just settling in that peace and investing in that is very valid.
Yeah, because I imagine, and I'm curious to get both of your thoughts on this, like if they're like with certain social conventions, there's certain ones that maybe we go through that like make us uncomfortable, right? Or make us think, oh, that's not really for me, right? Were you talking about like polyamory? Like maybe there is something where in that, and again, I'd love to hear your thoughts, where you're like, there's something that's not right there for me. So then you go exploring, and I don't know where that comes from, that questioning, but you know, in those certain areas where there's not that questioning, right? Maybe it just is right, and it is okay. And maybe there's these things where we don't have to understand the why of every single thing that we do, right? Instead, it's spending more and more time exploring certain ones, right? The ones that make us uncomfortable about the way society runs, and spend all of our time and energy on that.
So on this topic of social structures and conventions, do you feel like marriage is a beneficial social structure in our society today? Because there are also lots of arguments supposedly against marriage, and in terms of divorce rates, in terms of dissatisfaction, in terms of, I don't know, financial reasons, or even child-rearing reasons. What do you guys think? If marriage, let's say, were abolished and there was no such thing as marriage, do you think that would be a loss to society, or do you think that it wouldn't cause any issues and it would be completely fine?
I think for some people it definitely works. It's not necessarily for me, but when I look into, I think, more conservative side of people kind of really benefit from that and love that. And since they believe in religion and this commitment and thing, I think they invest more time for their family, and they're, I think, more able to understand the structure and importance of the family because of religion. And it definitely works for some people. But at the same time, in more developed countries, or at least in the countries that I've been to, the marriage rates are dropping, and also more people are choosing to be partners and having kids without getting married.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely depends on that person, on their beliefs, their values. So I think it's important to actually explore. Maybe marriage is actually something for me. I don't know. I just don't know anything at this point about marriage.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to explore, to be honest.
I think one of the big, I'm with you, Ruri, I know nothing. Yeah,
I think that's like all three
pretty
of
much
us.
the theme of our podcast. We don't really know. Yeah, like that's the theme of it. It's like, hey, by the way, we're going to talk about these things that we don't know. Yeah. Also, side note, I'm so sorry that my my camera, like the lighting here, makes me look like an oompa loompa. So here we are, like,
wait, why?
It's just
What's
getting worse and worse. But here, yeah. So it's just so orange. It's like I'm like an oompa loompa in the first iteration of Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory. I'll start doing the squats, right?
You're right though. It's getting more orange over time. What's happening?
Yeah, I know. It's just something with the light. Yeah, that's what I'm probably gonna adjust, but yeah, this is what happens when you're in a guest room and one source of light.
Hang in there.
So side note, like, the thumbnail is going to be like me dressed as an Oompa Loompa, like with the green hair.
First the green M&Ms, now the green Oompa Loompa hair.
But the green M&Ms with the green, yeah, it comes full circle. But wait, back to that question, because I think it's a really, really good one. And when I was sitting there, I was like, what would we lose, right, in society? I think that we would actually, one of the biggest things we would lose is from a cultural perspective. Because I was like, oh, I'm going to make a joke that we'll lose out on a lot of parties. Yeah. But the reality is we would. Like, all of those little, like, the ideas of cultures, how they've been doing weddings the same way for hundreds or thousands of years. And I think that because I just went to my friend's weddings, who, it was an Orthodox Jewish wedding. And, like, these are traditions. They're chanting the same things in Hebrew that have been chanted for thousands of years. Right, going to a wedding of my buddy is going to be an Indian wedding, and like India, there's obviously so many people and so many cultures within that country, But there are going to be certain things that, like, hey, this has been passed down from family member to family member over and over again. So to me, that's one of the biggest things that we would lose. Because Ruri, I think you make a great point that, like, we have these things of you can have actual life partnerships, right, without the label of marriage, like without the, like, where you're legally, right, you're legally together, but it's not in the traditional sense of marriage. But if a marriage just went away completely, I think about, like, that's the way that so many people, billions of people, have bonded to, like, and have understood each other throughout human history. And that would be maybe the saddest thing for us to lose in this process, because this idea of marriage, I think so often we think about for the long term, right? We think about, it's like, oh, what does this mean for a whole life? But also for some people, like, what does it just mean on that one day, right? What does it mean on that day where you're coming together, where you're having this wedding, where you're doing these traditions?
Yeah, because a lot of people, they say, oh yeah, I spent, like, I don't know, 30 grand on my wedding, but I have no regrets. It was the best day of my life. And just that point of losing out on those traditions, and even just that reason to bring together all of your loved ones, your family and friends from both sides, to celebrate on one, like, lavish, fun day, that would be sad. That would definitely be a loss. In terms of, like, the longer term view of marriage, though, almost, I feel like a lot of it is about mindset. And I feel like marriage, in a way, is a way of creating a ritual around this mindset of being together and focusing on that partnership. But like you were saying, Ruri, you don't need that piece of paper for that mindset or that commitment. So I feel like people will find other ways to express commitment to one another. I think it's a very natural human thing to want to make those kinds of commitments to somebody that you love and somebody that you want to be with. And I feel like even if marriage were just disappeared and it wasn't a thing anymore, somehow people would find a way to do that.
And maybe it's the idea that it's not someday, like, that's what's happening right now, right? To your point there, Ruri, in you know, we'll call it more industrialized, developed countries, like, that's what is happening, right, with marriage rates going down. So it's and surely just questioning for each of us, like, what do we want that commitment there? And maybe it's this is such a hard topic. Like, this is why I was hesitant to do it, not because of, like, going into it, but because, like, it's just been something for so long, just accepted, like, yep, this is going to be a part of life, and, like, felt good about that, and, like, still feel good about it, but, like, that questioning of why, it's like, why is it, right? And, like, also, do I have judgments against other people in the way that they're doing those things? Or if somebody were to ask, like, maybe if I have kids one day, right, which I hope to have, that this is where maybe that mentality is going. It's like, well, if they ask what is the point of marriage, like, how do I explain to them other than, hey, I feel a peace in this with me?
I guess from a financial standpoint, there are tax benefits to being married. But other than that, so there's tax benefits, but that's not really a good reason to get married. I guess in terms of the family unit, marriage does quite well protect a kind of family unit, and kind of underneath the kind of umbrella and surname and all the assets are shared together in the family. But again, that's not a very compelling reason as to this is why you should get married. It's not on its own going to hold up to explaining to your kids why they should or shouldn't get married. I guess at the end of the day, it's a very personal decision as to whether it's meaningful to you. Yeah,
to your point, Matt, you said, like, tradition and culture, the part of, like, the marriage. I actually remember the talk that I had with one of my friends who really wants to get married, and she wants to do a very classical Turkish marriage. We have, like, a lot of cultural things, and she wants to do all of them, and I hate all of them. I just hate those traditions. Because, like, in one of it, the male side, so comes to your, like, dad's place, and they literally want their daughter to be his, like, I don't know, wife. They literally want the daughter from the dad, but I just disagree with that. I'm not my dad's, like, an object or something. I decide who I want to get married, and I decide if you can marry me or not. So asking my dad, I just hate that culture. Probably a lot of people might get offended about that, but I just don't agree with that, and I'm not going to do that. And, like, there are a lot of other traditional parts in that as well, and she loves every single of it. And she really romanticized that, And she really wants to do that. And she said, like, I saw a lot of my family members doing that, and I know their excitement, and I want to be in that place too. And she wants to experience that thing as well. And she also really values the culture. And another thing that she believes is that after getting married, as you said, Izzy, it's easier to get into that mindset. And she really believes into traditional roles of like a dad and mom. So for her, it's important to get into that mindset. But for me, I don't have the traditional beliefs of a role of mom or dad, because my family's, I don't know, structure is not really something I think common. Like, my mom is the boss, literally the boss of our house, and then my dad is like more kind of a servant. We call him actually a servant in our household. So like, we were
sounds like your dream.
Kind of telling that. Yeah, exactly. Like, my mom is the boss, and I'm kind of like a CEO, and my dad is servant, and my brother is like the puppy that everyone loves. And I think that family structure really affected me, and started to question like classical marriage. What is the point? Because I don't believe any of those things. Like, the traditional part, cultural part, not important. The mindset, not important. The religious part, no, not for me. So for me, it doesn't make sense at all. But part of me also really wants to experience that, I don't know, traditional thing, maybe a Japanese marriage, because I never saw it. And I thought it would be fun to just invite my friends and have the ceremony together and share a part of my culture with my friends. And I might mix it up like some Turkish cultures, the parts that I love, with the Japanese one, and do like extraordinary wedding. It might be really fun though. But at the same time, I just don't know. I don't know at this point. I don't know anything.
I think that should be added to our bio. Hello and welcome to Milliseconds Apart. 3 friends that don't really know what's going on. But we're going to have a great chat about it anyway.
I mean, that's the honest truth right there. Wait, I have a question for both of you, right? Because I think that both of you come from, like, have the mentality, right? Getting to know both of you, that you don't, right, you're very independent yourselves, and you're very much like neither of you fit into the traditional stereotypical roles, right, that would fall for men and women. So if you were to get married, would you take if you get married to a guy, would you take your husband's surname?
This is such a good question. This is actually something I think about a lot, because I was in one of my previous relationships. The guy was very keen on me taking his surname when this came up. This is an ex, but I always felt a bit of, I don't know, a bit of resistance, because I identify very strongly with my name, and I feel like changing my surname would be losing a part of my identity, or at least changing a part of my identity, and I wouldn't want to do that. So I feel like I'd almost want to go maybe double-barreled. I don't really know, but I would feel uncomfortable with losing my surname, and I'd also feel slightly uncomfortable not changing it at all. Weirdly, because I would feel strange not having. So for example, like if I have kids with a future partner, what surname do the kids take? They'd probably conventionally take the man's surname, right? And I wouldn't want to inflict a double-barreled surname on my kids. I'm sorry, I just wouldn't, because if everyone double barrels, then you end up with like quadruple barrels and like so many. It just becomes a bit crazy, right? So I probably wouldn't inflict a double-barreled surname on them, but then I wouldn't share a name with like the rest of my immediate family, and that would make me feel a bit like weird, or like a bit left out, a bit of FOMO from the family. So I'd almost want to have some kind of connection in name to them, but I still wouldn't want to give up my surname Seeley. So I think I might go for a double barrel, but this is something that genuinely plagues me, and I think about a lot, because I'm not comfortable with any permutation, really. I'm not fully settled or at peace with it. Yeah. What about you, Ruri? What are your takes on it?
I wouldn't. I would never ever give up on my surname. And when it comes to double barrel, the thing is that like having double surnames, it sucks to have 2 surnames. I have 2 names and 2 surnames, and my name is hella long, and every single time I do illegal stuff, they forget either of my surname, and I always have a problem. Because my name in Japan and my name in Turkey is different. So like I have Japanese name, Japanese surname, Turkish name, and Turkish surname. So the legal processes hard AF. I don't recommend. I might even remove one of my surnames so that I can actually get easy, these legal stuff, because it's so hard and it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
But other than that, I won't ever, never, ever give up on my surname. My actually grandma didn't give up on her surname. My grandpa take her surname, which is not common at all in Japan, especially in their time. Because the thing that my grandma told me is that she was coming from like a very wealthy, good family from Japan, and my grandpa comes from a very a small village. So he initially moved to my grandma's place, so he took my grandma's surname. And I think in our Ohama family, we have a huge pride on our surname, because throughout my grandma's grandma also, she didn't take her husband's surname too. Everyone kept having their mother's surname. So I think it's one of the important thing that we do in our Ohama family. My mom didn't take my dad's surname too. That's why I have 2 surnames, and it really sucks. And I think one of the things I would never ever change is that my surname, and if that person wants to get married with me, they can either keep their surname, but our kid will definitely have my surname, not their surname, not even 2 surnames. No, only my surname. If they will agree on that, we can get married. If they not, then bye-bye.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see. It sounds like it's quite a matriarchal structure in your family in a way, with the woman giving her surname, and also in your household with your mum being the queen bee and you the CEO. And then
exactly, my dad's servant, my brother's the puppy.
The entertainment.
Yeah, exactly. The clown.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Wait, I think I really like the last point though that you brought up there, Ruri, in particular, where you said, and if that won't work, then we won't work, essentially. And I think that mentality is actually fine, where whenever we look at all of the things that we discussed thus far, whether somebody agrees to marriage in the traditional sense or they don't want it at all, whether you want to, whether this whole discussion with surnames, if you want to have, the man's, the woman's, what's going to happen with the kids, we can all decide whatever we want. And if it's enough of a sticking point, well, then there's billions of other people out there. It's just not the one. This whole idea of, convincing another person to do what we want, that to me just sounds so futile. That has, this idea of, because I've thought about it, I was would I want my future wife to take my surname? And I think that the answer is yes, but at a minimum, I would want it for my kids. And so it's that mentality, none of these are right or wrong. It's just one where find somebody that's compatible in that area, right? Whether they agree in that mentality or it's not something that they care about to fight. And it's in this way, so often, maybe in societal basis, we try to convince other people to live the way that we want to live. Well, why are we even really doing that? Is it to feel more comfortable in our own decisions? And if that's the answer, we should be doing the searching inside why we want that outside validation. And I get it. It's easier to say from the perspective of if you want more of the traditional things that are more socially accepted, right? So that's easier to say, okay, people can judge, whatever. But I think it goes with either way, because at the end of the day, right, we're going to live, then we're going to die. And usually on our deathbeds, we're going to have those regrets if we gave in too much. And sure, this is also from a perspective of, in a place where there is a lot more freedom. Is there freedom for everybody to do whatever? No, there's not yet, right? But this isn't in a place where people are being persecuted as much, right? Compared, in the US compared to other countries. But with all of these things, it's making our decisions, having our reason why, or even if the why is just it feels good enough, and going forth with that, right? The judgment of other people, that's a lot of wasted time, or trying to convince other people of our way, because there's just so many people that we can interact with, whether in a romantic way or as friends.
I definitely resonate with that point. Although I think there's also a role for compromise, because that's the thing. I feel like sometimes if 2 people really love each other, and they both want things a certain way, like what are they willing to give up on or bend or change about themselves in order to make that relationship work? Because I think if, let's say, I don't know, if I were very set on wanting to keep my surname and wanting to have my kids have my surname, I'm sure there would be somebody out there who would be happy to accept that, but would they be the person that I would genuinely be in love with and genuinely be compatible with in all those other ways? Like, there's so many aspects and so many other things that are more important to me than giving my kids my surname or maintaining my surname completely unchanged, that I think this is something that I would maybe compromise on. But I think that's also why, like what you're touching on about the deathbed stuff, like what you are most likely to regret is giving up too much. I think this is also why it does play on my mind a lot, because it is one of those things where I realize in the future I'm quite likely to compromise on this point, which isn't really my preference, but I will be willing to sacrifice it for other things. And that's always a little bit uncomfortable when you're going through the process or when you're anticipating it, but it may be worth it overall.
Even this idea of, I've had this discussion with a few friends, this idea of compromise, because I've definitely said, like, I will never compromise, because the way that I define compromising is giving up on something that actually matters to me. Where, like, a lot of the time, like these sorts of things where, say it's like, you know, like my wife taking my surname, like, I'm not actually that hung up on that, right? That to me is one where it's like, do what you want. So I don't view that as a compromise because it's not so important to me. Whereas, you know, maybe there is something like having kids, right? That is something that would be a compromise if the other person doesn't want to, because she can be perfect in every other way. But this is something that means so much to me, so I won't compromise on that. So, and I guess it's kind of the semantics of the word. Yeah. I agree that there's this kind of give and take, but I view that as like, all right, hold strong on the things that actually matter to us. And on everything else, like, to me, there's much more of a piece of letting it go instead of saying like, oh, I'm compromising, like I'm giving something up. That to me, like, can create resentment in the way that I view the world. And, like, I don't want that. I would much rather it just be the kind of case where it's like, oh, like, I determined that this doesn't actually matter to me, so I let go of it peacefully, right? And like, there's much more of like, okay, that matters to you. Like, am I, like, how do we kind of resonate? That's the give and take to me.
For me, in a way, I think it does come down to this definition of what is compromise. Like, for me, I have a lot of like subtle, gentle preferences for things that aren't like make or break. So it's just like, for example, I would prefer to one day live in a very warm, sunny country. Actually, maybe that's not something that I would prefer. I just need that. But that's, for example, like a preference. Or I would prefer to, I don't know, what else would I prefer? I don't know. I would, for example, I would prefer to keep my surname in some capacity in my name because I identify very strongly with it. But it's not something that is a core value. So like what you're talking about, Matt, about kids being like a core value, that's really important to you. Like, those things are just preferences, and I would still like to use the word compromise. Just for me personally, I feel like giving up or letting go of those things is a compromise, but I don't think that needs to be a bad thing. I think compromise can be seen as almost a good thing. The ability to compromise means that you're able to get along with people, and you're able to change yourself and adapt and compromise and fit in with other people. And it's not that you're giving up on yourself, it's that you recognize this is only a minor preference and I will let go of that in order to make everything else easier and to live a peaceful life and just be at peace with that. So I think there's that distinction there between must-haves, core values, and just slight preferences or aesthetic preferences for things. So yeah, actually, speaking of surnames, another ex, that's a different ex, actually wanted to take my name. He didn't like his own surname, and he was like, I like your surname more. I wanted to, like, can we all be called Seeley? So it's quite interesting because there are people out there who are not following along with like social conventions or what you would necessarily expect, and that's actually their preference.
I can really relate on that. Every single ex that I had actually wanted to take my surname because they think my surname is like really cool, and they were actually really excited for that. But I was like, we're not getting married even. I'm not getting to you.
You don't get to have this. This is a limited edition.
That's what I was for both of yours, but whenever you were both saying those things, I was like, man, they may want it, but you don't want them, so see ya, sorry.
I think that's probably all we have time for today, so if we call it a day there. But thank you so much for listening, and to all the listeners, we'd like to know whether you see the value in getting married and whether you want to get married and why. Importantly, tell us why. Let us know in the comments. And also, if you have any other questions or anything else you want to say to us, leave them in the comments. We read all of your comments and we love getting them. So, yeah, hit us up. And thanks so much for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, that's a wrap.